What happens when we create machines that are as or more intelligent than we are? What are the possible timelines, implications, and ways forward to ensure we create the most positive future for our world? In this episode sequences on responses to AGI, we look at how people, organizations around the world are responding to a future with much more capable AI systems and how we can look to more effectively ensure a positive future with this technology. This is the AGI show, and I'm your host, Sarush Paur. Katja Grace is our guest today. Katja is the co-founder and lead researcher at AI Impacts, which is a research group trying to answer questions about the future of AI. Things like, when will certain capabilities arise? What will AI itself look like? And how will it all go for humanity? What would those outcomes look like? Katja studied Bachelor of Science at the Australian National University and started a PhD at Carnegie Mellon University before dropping out to work on understanding the future of AI. In January, so last month before this recording date, AI Impacts, the organization Katja's at, released the largest and most up-to-date survey of AI researchers. They surveyed about 3,000 peer-reviewed researchers at top-tier AI conferences like NeurIPS and ICML to get their takes on the pace of AI progress and the impacts of advanced AI on our world. There's a ton of really, really interesting and valuable data points that came out of this survey, including the fact that AI researchers have dramatically reduced their timelines to when AI systems will be able to tackle all human tasks and occupations autonomously. More than half the researchers also gave a 5% or higher chance of extremely bad, such as extinction, outcomes from AI. This extinction result holds even when you only look at the researchers who had at least 10,000 paper citations, so people who with the biggest clout and experience in the field. I wanted to invite Katja to the show today to talk us through the survey, the nuances of it, how views have shifted over time in the AI research field, and really start to dig into these results to help us understand what the future might look like and how people are thinking about it. It's great to have you on the show, Katja. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Awesome. So let's just start off with, I'd love to hear a little bit about you, Katja. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your work in the AI field.
Yeah. I guess I've long-term been interested in working on whatever will most effectively make the world better. And I guessed that AI was worth trying to figure out whether it was a big deal. I guess around a decade ago, where for a lot of that time I've been trying to demonstrate that it isn't an extinction risk, I guess. Or like I've thought a lot about making the argument clearly for AI being an extinction risk, or not, and tried to come up with counter arguments. I think lately I've been more like, I don't know, I can't easily demonstrate that it's not, so probably should lean into trying to do something about it more.
So that's actually really interesting. So was there a period of time where you were skeptical of the arguments, or you felt the opposite was even true? Was that where the motivation came from?
Yes. Or like I thought I didn't know of a place where the arguments had been made sort of watertightly enough
right.
that I was willing to buy them. I think there's there should be a strong presumption against any particular thing destroying the world. So
right. Especially when that requires like a strong policy response, or curtailing people's rights, or any of those kinds of things that require those kinds of responses.
Yeah. Though I think I was more thinking about like, should I be like potentially wasting my life trying to do something about this if it's not a real thing? And many people I know. So it's like, if we have a certain amount of effort we can put into trying to make the world better somehow, if you waste it all because you listened to two hand-wavy arguments, that's a tragedy. because there are a lot of really important things to put effort into in the world.
Absolutely.
So that was the thing more in my mind. So I guess I started AI Impacts as it was more like a cause prioritization type effort initially when I started with my co-founder. Or it sort of grew out of an effort to just make arguments about lots of different causes really clearly, which is quite tricky, it turns out. So, I still don't think that I have a really watertight argument. But yeah, working on it.
Fascinating. And do you want to just describe a little bit of the kinds of research you've done with AI impacts? Like what are some of the questions you've dug into?
Yeah, there's sort of one cluster that's just like trying to make the argument clear, or like find all the counter arguments that are relevant, which is, I guess, more sort of philosophical with bits of empirical stuff. There's stuff about like will progress happen really fast? So AI Impacts did quite a big project on discontinuous progress, and like in particular whether we're likely to see discontinuous progress in AI. But based on trying to collect data in general about when technologies see discontinuous progress. So we looked into things like Eli Whitney's cotton gin, because it's considered like a big jump in cotton ginning technology. We're like, all right, was it really? Like we looked into ships, like ship sizes, and the Eiffel Tower, and just like all kinds of different technologies.
Kinds of like measures of progress.
Yeah. So we're trying to like have a base rate for how often do technologies see big jumps, but also be able to say like, I don't know, people had various stories for why AI would see big jumps, and why it was like different from other technologies. So we also wanted to check those stories somewhat and say like, all right, so we have this base rate, and then do we have some reason to think that AI will be different? And so, yeah, as a sort of more philosophical project, we have a big collection of arguments why AI might be different. And I guess I don't think I ended up thinking any of those were super compelling. Though I think they maybe could be with more details filled in. I guess another kind of thing we've done that's sort of related is people often think that AI will very quickly cross the human range of capability. Like we'll have AI that's
right.
an idiot, and then it will quickly be Einstein. As probably Eliezer has popularized this thought. And so we've looked for empirical data about that for narrow things where we're already at human level. Because like, if it's true that between an idiot and Einstein is very narrow, and it just seems wide to us because we're, just paying attention to that part of the spectrum, you might also expect that to be true for, say, chess, that AI would have just quickly shot from the worst human chess player to the best. And that's not true at all. It took like many decades to go. Like the worst human chess player is like not much better than the first AI that could play chess. I think like it didn't take very long to get to bottom of the range human level, and then it took a lot of decades to get to top of the range human level. And so I guess we've like collected data about that, like empirical data to check that. So I guess we often do sort of empirical case study type things to check things that people talk about in the abstract. I guess I'm sort of optimistic in general about getting empirical data, maybe more than many people.
No, it's fantastic. And I think we need people who are doing strong empirical kind of fact checking and evidence building, because I do think some of these conceptual arguments, for one, there's kind of like different conceptual arguments you can make, and they lead to very different conclusions. So you need some way to start to discern between them. There are some very smart people with very different views about the future of AI. So that is very helpful. And actually, I originally found your work not through this survey, but through the AI Impacts blog, which was one of the first in-depth and high-quality discussions and investigations of AI futures that I found. So it's a fantastic resource. Yeah, I'll definitely recommend listeners check it out, and I'll definitely put it in the show links. I am curious how has your research in AI impacts evolved your thinking? So what are some of your kind of your current conclusions or takeaways, having done all of this work for so many years?
Yeah, I think it's very hard to remember like what one believed, nearly a decade ago, especially when the kind of culture in general changes. Like I think at the moment, maybe many people expect AI to be more continuous, like AI progress to sort of continuously progress to something like human level and not have big jumps. And so it's easy to feel like, oh, that was always kind of obvious. I think like I think that our research probably made a difference to my views on that before things shifted somewhat.
So so the conclusion you've had is that it's going to be more continuous and less discontinuous, not a overnight or short amount of time jump, but you will see steps in that progress over time.
Yeah, though I think I already thought that much more than other people. Like partly I did this project because I was like, I think everyone's wrong about this. Yeah, exactly. But I think like probably what we found didn't, seem like gave me more confidence in that view. And I want to distinguish between like jumps, like sort of leading up to human level-ish performance and like fast progress afterward. So I'm not here talking about like an intelligence explosion where AI helps improve itself and there's just like very fast progress. I'm thinking more of like, do you have basically useless AI and then when you put the right pieces together, suddenly it's very useful or something, which seemed like a sort of common
so you're more looking at
the
first half of the journey, not the like post you've already got AGI or superhuman systems.
Yeah. I think I've also been sort of more skeptical about that as well. But I don't have strong views at the moment.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Well, we'll come back. I want to dig more into this kind of discussion of like your views of the futures, given all the work you've done. But let's spend a bit of time into the survey, which is really interesting and helps us think more about what the rest of the field is thinking about as well.
Yeah.
I'd love to just start with tell us a little bit about the survey. What was the methodology? And maybe what were some of the headline results?
Yeah. So we tried to keep it very close to the previous surveys that we've done. So this was the third. I guess when I say we, it was like a different group of people each time, but including me. And so we used identical questions basically, except like a few minor edits, but also added some more questions. For the new questions, and I guess also in 2016 or so, for the older questions, we find some people to take the survey while talking to us and be like, what did you think that question meant? What are you thinking? Why did you say that? And try and check that people understand the questions and are attending to the bit that we mean for them to attend to. Which I guess I've generally found kind of eye-opening, the extent to which people don't understand.
Right, it's not obvious what a good question looks like.
Yeah, like even after you've thought a lot about it and really been over like, is this a good definition of AGI? No, it has this corner case. Then you sort of show it to people and realize that they are not even thinking of something close to what you had in mind. And so then we repeat that until they do understand. I mostly saw.
So you battle test the questions. Yep.
Yeah, that's right. I guess what are you interested in about the methodology?
Well, I'm curious. Like who did you survey? What was the venue? All those things.
Yeah. So for the two previous surveys, we surveyed people who'd published in NeurIPS and ICML the previous year. So we tried to just dig up the email addresses for like everyone who published, which is somewhat tricky. So we always miss some emails, but I think we got more than 90% of them. I guess
and for context for our listeners, NeurIPS and ICML are two of the largest and most prestigious ML machine learning conferences in the world.
And in 2023, we expanded it to 6 top venues, 5 conferences and a journal. And so again, we tried to dig up all of their email addresses and wrote to them. I think this was partly just because some people had concerns that this was like not a broad enough sample of AI researchers.
Okay.
And so, this is a bigger sample, the biggest sample as far as we know. And I guess also it looks like the results are pretty similar in the 2023 survey, whether you look at just the people from NeurIPS and ICML or the entire sample, which does suggest that, just looking at the other two would have been fine.
Right. And that's important, especially if you're trying to compare numbers as trend lines. You have to make sure that's not just a change in your sample.
Yeah. So I don't think we've checked that for like every question, but for,
sure,
for the few questions we looked at, I think they were sort of surprisingly similar.
Yeah. And then I'm curious, so then when you email these people, obviously not everyone's going to respond. So
Indeed.
what were response rates? Do you have any thoughts on the selection effect, of who's choosing to respond versus not respond?
So like about 15% of people responded. I don't expect that that's very biased in terms of opinions that they have about things. I feel like it's worth distinguishing between there being some bias in who responds and it being relevant to any particular question that you want to know the answer to. For instance,
right. The bias could be like who's the busiest, which is a real bias, but that may not actually matter for your results.
Yeah, I think that there's surely some bias in terms of the like people who've been in the field for longer respond less. Presumably they're busier, etc. There are definitely those kinds of things. I think I don't know of much reason to expect there's bias based on opinion. I think the main evidence for that is probably that like a handful of people, like I don't know, maybe I know of like 2 or 3 people who said that they didn't respond because they thought the survey was biased or something. So those people presumably have a particular opinion, I guess. It's like, I guess helpful that they also say this on Twitter so you can at least count them a bit. Like, well, there are an extra 3 people who thought AI is not a problem or something. I don't know how many of them there are who don't announce it.
And is the way the email framed, is there anything that you think, that people would get any sense of, motivations or anything that would kind of deter any types of people?
Yeah, we tried to, for the purpose of minimizing response bias, we tried to be pretty vague about the topic and sort of say that it's like about AI progress type things, not like, about like extreme far future things or risks. I don't think we mentioned that, etc. I think, last time people complained that that I was listed as affiliated with MIRI, the Machine Intelligence Research Institute. And so this year we didn't list that. We just listed us as being associated with AI impacts. I don't know if any, I guess I don't have a great sense of what perceptions people have of like AI impacts from afar and whether that implies something about like what our motivations are or something. I think for some level of knowledge about us, they might be like, they care about AI safety for higher level of knowledge about us, they might say like, they're, I don't know, a mixture of sort of skeptical and concerned.
Which is definitely true. I've
like,
met AI impacts writers who are more skeptical. Like it's definitely a more balanced cohort than many. And I don't mean this. I mean this in the nicest way possible in this context. Like it's not so well known that probably it would cause a massive bias the way, say,
that does make sense.
Like an OpenAI or Jan LeCun,
Right.
like those people are like well known and people have strong opinions of them. I think AI impacts would be much more in the background.
Yeah. I also think that, I mean, it might also be like very few people complaining about this, but then it sort of gets attention. But I think such people might be not remembering how big the survey is. Like a lot of these people are in China or something, and my guess is that they probably don't, you know, like Miri is not salient to them, would be my guess, but could be wrong.
Right. Okay, so we've you've reached out to a large cohort of researchers at 6 top venues. 15% have responded, which for the context of audience members, 15% response rate on any email, like mass email, is actually quite high. That for me is a kind of hit rate that shows like relatively broad engagement, you know, rather than like very, very much a niche thing. So that's actually pretty high numbers. And then how many people were you able to get in the survey at total to complete the survey?
So I should actually also say that we paid them $50 to in the hope of increasing the response rate in a way
higher response rate, probably.
Yeah. At least this time it did seem to make a difference. Last year, it was hard to tell what difference offering money made, but yeah.
Interesting.
But yeah, the hope there was to kind of increase it in a way that's like pretty uncorrelated with opinion. Hopefully, like maybe it increases the number of people who value their time more do it. So
maybe like early career or students or something like that. But still, that's not too bad of a sample change.
Yeah, that's the hope. Yeah, and then how many people did do it in the end? Nearly 3,000.
Gotcha. On the order of 3,000, which is a lot for I mean, there's a lot of researchers these days, but still, that's a fairly large sample of researchers. Fantastic. Yeah. And then, is there anything else you want to call out in the methodology that gives you kind of more or less confidence in the results that came out of the survey?
I guess I think in general, like when we're making decisions about things, like the team is just pretty interested in like epistemic integrity, which is like maybe a hard thing to prove in general. Yeah, exactly. Like I think for a distance, maybe it's like hard to tell to what extent that's a cultural thing. But yeah, I think it's a relatively careful group who, are pretty worried about being misleading in some way.
Katja, you're actually the fourth AI impacts writer that I've met. I think fourth off the top of my head. And I would definitely personally vouch for that or say that's true. Like the types of people involved that I've met, they've not been people who are just trying to, dogmatically convince me of a point of view. They're much more, lots of questioning even of their own views. So there's clearly a cultural norm around like truth seeking, which I think is very valuable here.
Yeah, it seems right.
Fantastic. Well, let's now that we've kind of touched on it and given ourselves any reason to believe in the results or care about the results. I'd love to get more into the results themselves. What are some of the like major results of the survey in your view?
I think to me the most the biggest result is the chance of AI causing human extinction median about 5%. Answer just because I do think that human extinction is a big deal.
Yes,
I think I don't know there's I think like we are asked 4 different questions to different subsets of people, so each person got 2 questions that were roughly about this, and the answers are pretty similar. So I think you asked me what would make me like trust the answers in the survey. I think I don't trust them to like much precision, but I think like if the typical person is saying like 5% this catastrophe will happen, then I think like it's very much worth taking seriously that they think there's a sort of low but substantial risk of it. Like maybe 5% in particular isn't super reliable, but I guess for that sort of thing, you probably want the risk to be like way, way below 1%. So,
even if we take the weakest possible statistical conclusion, which is like 15% of, top ML researchers think there is a very non-negligible chance of extinction. That's still a pretty interesting result. Even if you imagine there was some bias, which we're not saying there is, but if there was, the fact that such a large chunk of researchers do think this is a real concern and a real risk is very interesting.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. Right. Yeah. I think maybe that's also part of why I feel like the sort of concerns about bias are not a huge deal. Is even if you thought it was like as biased as it could possibly be, you're still getting a pretty alarming number out at the end.
Yeah. Was there any questions in the survey that kind of dug more into this extinction question, like more about how they see this happening, or any details of what exactly there might be on their minds as they answer that question?
Yeah, as we asked them about what kinds of traits they thought AI systems might have in the future, where I guess various of those traits were related to kinds of stories people tell about what might happen in the future with AI and go badly. So I think that is some evidence about it. We also asked about like scenarios that they were concerned about.
What were some of these traits and scenarios?
So I think one particularly interesting trait is like take actions to attain power, because that's kind of central to a story about how AI causes human extinction, that, for instance, Joe Carl Smith has written about, which I think of as kind of like the canonical story that many people are thinking of. Like you build systems that are basically agents, and they have some goals. They're not super aligned with human goals, and they take power for themselves, and then they sort of control the long-term future, and humans are no longer relevant. So I guess people that like among the traits that we asked people about in the future, that was actually like the one people least thought would happen. So I think that's kind of interesting. I think it might still be like consistent with that being like the explanation, in that the percentage of answers who like people who thought it was sort of even chance or something that it might happen is still like 40% total, or like even chance or better of it happening. So yeah, for like trying to explain lots of people having a low probability on something like that, it's true that that there's a decent, like, it's not like everyone is saying this couldn't happen. They're saying like plausibly for many of them, but still it was like much less likely.
I just want to make sure I understood that. Were you saying that, so we were kind of digging into the traits or scenarios that are concerning people, like leading people to some risk of extinction? Were you saying that the power grabbing trait or scenario was was relatively a small chunk of the responses? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, that's right. Or I guess
interesting.
Like each person, we asked them like, how likely do you think this trait is? And they could say like very unlikely, even chance, likely, very likely. And so, at the bottom of the list, where very few people consider it very likely, is take actions to attain power.
Interesting. And so what's at the top of that list? What are some of the things that people consider much more likely?
Can talk like a human on most topics. Very, very likely. There's sorts, only maybe a bit over 50% of people who say that it's more than 90% likely. So still is a decent amount of like uncertainty. People saying like maybe not.
Interesting. I find that hard because I'm like, it's pretty damn.
It's pretty close.
Yeah, you could probably pass most Turing tests today, but okay. But that's not. It's not my place to.
Yeah. I feel like it's a bit all over the place, but I agree. It can feel like that.
Maybe some of these maybe these Chinese language researchers are looking at it and be like, well, it's pretty bad at Chinese still or something. Maybe there's some
true.
cultural gap here that I'm missing.
Yeah. Though, if I recall, Chinese people expected things to happen sooner and also to be riskier. So
interesting.
I feel like maybe they have this sense that things are like more extreme.
What are some of the other traits Oh, sorry. I was just curious about more of the other traits on the top of the list.
Find unexpected ways to achieve goals, which I guess is a bit vague. It could be like basically what you expect if you ask someone to do a thing for you without any details, or it could be like much more sinister.
Right.
Frequently behave in ways that are surprising to humans. I think that's a bit more sinister. If you just sort of ask your personal assistant to do a thing and they successfully fill in the details about how to do it, you're not usually like shocked by that. Can be jailbroken to follow illegal commands.
So potentially more of the misuse type of risks popping up there.
Yeah. Sometimes deceive humans to achieve a goal without this being intended by humans. Sounding again more like the AI itself is the perpetrator of the wrongdoing. Have goals not aligned with human goals. We're now sort of like halfway down the list. So this is
so now we're getting to more the middle bracket.
Yeah. I think it's worth noting that for like kind of all these things, opinion is pretty spread out. Like there are some people who think it's more likely, and some people who think it's less likely. Like
it's
none
true
of them
the 5% number too, right? That was the median, but there's obviously going to be people who rate it higher, and people who put it near zero, something like that. Yeah.
So I think for a lot of the things in the survey, opinion is pretty spread out, which, because again, sort of makes me think these are not numbers you should sort of trust for like what exactly is going to happen, but more for like, can we rule out this risk or something? Like,
right.
Where for some sorts of things, I would expect that, like, if people were concerned about a really silly risk, the experts could look at it and be like, that's not going to happen, and come to agreement that it's not going to happen. Like, all experts on a topic would look at it and be like, yes, having a nuclear reactor is not going to cause the country to explode or something. Like,
right.
We can be confident.
We can the physics is clear there or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Whereas here it's, I think the thing that we can be more confident about is that these things aren't ruled out. That they're like quite plausible given looking at the technology. So yeah, those were the traits. And then you asked about the scenarios as well. Where there are a couple of scenarios that are kind of like potential extinction situations. So like AI systems with the wrong goals become very powerful and reduce the role of humans in making decisions.
That was on the top end of the scenario?
No, this is toward the bottom. So again, like the things that sound kind of like extinction risky are toward the bottom. And so and this is like how much concern do these scenarios deserve. So I think interestingly, the researchers are saying like the things that sound kind of like human extinction are like less deserving of concern than some of these other things like deep fakes, which is at the top. So the other one.
So what else are the ones at the top? Very curious now.
Yeah. So the very top one is AI makes it easy to spread false information, e.g. deep fakes. Where I guess looks like just over half of people consider it of extreme concern.
Oh, wow. Over half consider extreme. So, yeah, so misinformation, disinformation, those kind of things people are very concerned about. Yep.
Yeah. And then second is AI systems manipulate large-scale public opinion trends, which, is related.
But,
yeah, but I think different.
Mm-hmm.
Third is authoritarian rulers use AI to control their population. Fourth is other, but I think that's a bit misleading because most people are not giving a rating to it unless they rate something in.
Right.
So proper fourth is AI systems worsen economic inequality by disproportionately benefiting certain individuals. Yeah.
So a lot of these are things that we see, elements of today already. I mean, lots of it today. So I guess they're much more tangible, near-term, proven risks, and those are really near the top there.
Yeah, and I think also, I guess, if I recall, we asked how much concern do they deserve, in the next 30 years in particular. So I think if you thought that AI was likely to be an extinction risk, but not for longer, then the time when you should be really trying to avert it was later, then it wouldn't feature. I guess I think a different interesting thing about these kinds of concerns is that they all kind of interact. Even if you're concerned about human extinction, you might, or even if you thought that human extinction is a much worse thing to happen than people being wrong about various things per se. People being wrong about various things makes it very hard for society to make good choices about anything. You might think that the overall extinction risk is substantially worsened by public opinion being a mess or disconnected from reality or being pushed by various interests into different corners.
Yeah, and we could imagine that, right? Things like war breaking out between countries due to people having wrong perceptions of something that's happening, or a malicious actor who wants to see two actors at war kind of spreading disinformation to cause it, or something like that.
Yeah. And war often gets in the way of all kinds of things together.
Yeah. Do you get a sense from looking at the survey as a whole that AI researchers are positive or optimistic about the future with AI? What's your sense of that?
I mean, I think the question that's most relevant to that is the one that's just put all of the future probability into these 5 buckets of how good it will be.
Yeah.
Where I think there's a lot of overall mass in the very good scenarios. But also a decent small chunk in the extremely bad scenarios. And I guess I'm inclined to kind of read that as it's sort of wrong to summarize it as optimistic or pessimistic, perhaps. It's there are serious risks, and if we get past them, things could be seriously amazing. It's that's a not obviously optimistic or pessimistic. Well, but I think also the fraction of people who think that the future is more likely to be good than bad, I think was surprisingly low. I forget exactly what the number is, but I guess I would have expected the vast majority of AI researchers to think that it was more likely to be good than bad as a result of AI in particular.
So it's at least fair to say, that based on what you just said, while there are good, there's a decent amount of probability mass on good outcomes, there's also quite a mixed opinion, quite a split opinion on how the future will actually go based on a couple of these questions that ask it in a slightly different way.
I think I would particularly say it's not very split in the sense that like it's not like there are a whole bunch of people who think it's going to be amazing and a bunch of people who think it's going to be terrible. It really is like mostly people who think it could be terrible or amazing. So I think that's kind of good in that, you know, it's like better that people are on a similar page, and it's like less.
Right. It's not like the people are polarized, but within the researchers' minds themselves, they see both good and bad possibilities. Yeah.
I think that's right. Yeah. Or like most of them.
Was there a sense in the research or in the survey about what people think might be the distinguishing factor? Like what are the things that might cause us to enter the good futures versus the bad future? Was there some responses there in that respect?
I think not very directly, but I guess I found it interesting that like for all these scenarios that are potentially concerning, I guess it just seemed like quite a lot of concern to me. Like for all of them, there was quite a bit of or people thought they were quite worthy of concern. So I think you can at least say for like that list of however many scenarios is, you know, about 10. That's like the respondents thought that those were a way things could at least go, you know, somewhat badly in the near term. And it's hard to know how much they expect that to kind of carry forward and make the longer term future bad. I think like we have this question about like how good or bad things will be, and then we have some specific questions about human extinction. And they get sort of similar answers for like how likely very bad, e.g. human extinction is, or human extinction, which I think does at least suggest that the very bad scenarios people are thinking of are, you know, approximately mostly human extinction. Not like, you know, they're not imagining
not some other bad thing that's not human extinction. Yeah.
Yeah. Like roughly. Yeah.
Is there a section of the survey that talks to the desired responses, like what we should be? I think we touched on this a little bit, but just to like dig into it a bit further, like where our researchers wish we were doing more.
I think like just doing more research to make AI safer was quite popular, and has gone up a lot since the 2016 survey, if I recall. I think we didn't ask in more detail about what kinds of things they would want to see. I guess another question that kind of bears on what they would like to have happen was one about, you know, would you like what speed of AI progress would make you most optimistic about humanity's future or something like that. And there, I think like opinion was kind of spread out. Some people, you know, I think like neither much faster or much slower was that popular, and like much slower was particularly unpopular. And, you know, there are a chunk of people on a bit slower and a bit faster, and about the current rate. I think it's a bit hard to interpret this because if the like middle of the road option is the current rate, it's like, well, by default it sort of might get faster. So then it, you know, the people who said the current rate, are they actually in favor of in future it being slower than it would have been? Like, I don't know if they thought about that much.
Sure. Also, like the acceleration dynamics of some of these trend lines. Yeah.
I think I found that answer kind of interesting, just in that so many people would want it to go faster or the current rate. If so many people think that there's like, you know, a very non-negligible chance of human extinction, I think in order to have sort of consistent opinions, I would have thought more people would be in favor of going slower, with the caveat, like in the question, that everyone gets slowed down, where I think often there's concern that, like, you know, if responsible people slow down, then the less responsible people get to go faster. But the question specified that everyone goes slower.
Right.
And still that wasn't very popular. So I guess I'm sort of I think that's interesting update about what people are thinking, though I don't actually know what they're thinking there. Like if they think it's modestly likely to cause extinction, is it that they just like don't think that going slower would help, or they think there'll be some other bad thing to happen? I'm sure.
Yeah, it's obviously like we're definitely getting a bit into the speculation about why people chose what they did.
Yeah, very
but
much.
it is interesting. I mean, and this is I'm explicitly saying this is speculation. I mean, some of the types of speculation I could assume would be things like, you know, a bit of motivated reasoning. You know, researchers by their nature are there to create more AI research, you know, to push forward the bounds of AI progress. And so it's a hard thing to essentially say we should do less of what I'm doing or less of what my field is doing. Is a pretty hard thing to tick a box to.
That seems right. Also, I don't know, it feels like you might think that by default, like roughly 100% of people would be like, this thing I'm working on should go faster. And so maybe if like, you know, a good chunk of them are not, that's already like, whoa, that's a lot of support for
that's surprising
for going slower or something. So I think I was perhaps being naive in like my expectations there.
Right. So I'd love to talk a little bit about those trend lines that you were starting to mention. Yeah. So how have results evolved between the 2016 survey and the 2023 survey?
Yeah, I think for timelines to the roughly human level AI or to anything, I guess, as you mentioned, they have gotten shorter, where I guess interestingly, I think they stayed kind of similar between 2016 and 2022. Actually, sorry, I can't remember the answer for lots of different things. But for the like, when will all tasks be done? I think that changed by like a year between 2016 and 2022, and then dropped by, I think it was 13 years or so over the last year.
Right. So 2022 to 2023 was a big change for a lot of people. And obviously, you know, ChatGPT could have been a big part of that, as well as the broader conversation around AI really picking up.
Yeah. So I think like prior to running the survey, various people were like, you should run another survey. Like, you know, the answers will be very different now that ChatGPT and Bing and, you know, like just the whole world has kind of woken up to this being a problem, like or just like an issue. Probably the answers will be different. I think I was kind of unsure how much to expect the answers to be different, partly because they had been sort of consistent-ish before, where I might have expected them to change.
Is it?
And so for timelines, I think they jumped more than I expected. For like risks of like human extinction, I think they stayed surprisingly consistent. Like I think it's been median 5%, like extremely bad outcomes every time.
Interesting. Interesting.
So I guess like there it might be like, well, you see in public people becoming more concerned about it. Maybe it's sort of like the world catching up with what AI researchers broadly already thought. Like maybe in 2016, people would not have guessed that actually AI researchers already were saying like 5% extinction. Like that didn't get very much attention, if I recall, in 2016. Whereas maybe now it feels more like salient if the thing is happening very soon.
It is interesting though that's true on the extinction point, but on the timelines point, there was a big update between 2022 and 2023, which I think takes some evidence away, because there are people who will say things like, oh, ChatGPT actually wasn't that big of a jump. You know, all of this stuff, all the ML researchers already knew this stuff. There was already BERT and there was this and that. And the people do say that, but I think this is a pretty clear indication that people do see something has changed. Now, maybe that something has changed is not technological, it's commercial, and it's socio-political, but something has clearly changed with in that year, ChatGPT probably being the most likely event that changed things.
Yeah, that seems pretty. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. It seems pretty plausible. I don't know enough about what else is going on behind the scenes, or for technical AI researchers, what else they've seen. But yeah.
Yep, fair. Yeah, you don't want to put words in the researchers' mouths. I think, yeah, but I have a hunch that ChatGPT was a big deal, because even talking to lots of ML researchers play with ChatGPT too, and they're surprised and shocked by what's possible today versus what was possible 2 years ago. So that's, it's a bit more anecdotal for sure, but I do think it was a big deal for a lot of people.
Yeah, I guess I think it sort of makes a difference, like emotionally or sort of viscerally somehow, to really see an impressive thing versus, anticipating the abstract that it should happen in however many years.
Yep.
At least, and at least, I feel like that probably made a difference for me.
Totally. And I think there's also something very different about something being, somewhat possible in a research setting one time in a preview versus, this is good enough where hundreds of millions of people now use this every day. That's a different level of technological development. And I think that's a pretty sizable difference too.
Yeah. It seems like partly, even if you, this is speculating again, but I think even if you sort of understand technology well, it's maybe hard to understand just like what is involved in all the stuff going on in the world, or like what human life is. So even if you have like a technology that does X, maybe prior to seeing it get used for a bunch of stuff in the world, it's hard to know how much of like the stuff that goes on X is useful for, something like that.
Right. Absolutely. Like adoption, not necessarily and how it fits into society, all of these types of questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Super interesting. And I think you also mentioned a trend line, that there was a trend, correct me if I'm wrong, where there was an increase in the percentage of people that wanted to invest more in safety. Was that right? Was that a trend line between 2016 and 23 as well?
Yes, that's right. I think it was like maybe people who wanted much more AI safety research roughly went from like 14% in 2016 to 34% 2023. Got it.
So still a minority, but a much larger minority than before.
Yeah, there people who want more are also at like 36%. So in total, it's like 70% of people want more. Yeah,
fascinating. Well, that's
people
a good
who
chunk.
want less is like 8%.
Right. So that's a fairly large majority of AI researchers who, at least in theory, at least when asked, would want more safety research to be prioritized. Fascinating.
Yep.
I'm curious now to understand how people have reacted to these results. As you've publicized this survey, what have been the range of responses? Has there been kind of a median response to the results of the survey on things like social media, and any feedback you've gotten directly?
I feel like so the feedback is people just sort of quoting it and being like, "This is interesting. Look at this." Maybe that's a lot of it. I guess various journalists have written about it, often accurately.
Accurately, that's good.
Often.
Often still good. That's better than what I hear for a lot of these things.
Yeah. I like that. Like maybe the people who were bothered by, or the people who said it was biased last time, some of them again complained about it this time, but I think with less clear content, or we like tried to address anything that people complained about last time. Where often I think we could have addressed it last year because they were just mistaken about what we did, but we didn't write it up clearly. So this time we've tried to write it up more clearly. For instance, people thought that that it had like a huge rate of people not answering questions once they were looking at the survey, whereas in fact we just didn't assign questions to everyone.
Right. You did
for a lot of the questions we gave it. Yeah, exactly. But I think we did not explain that well. So this time we've tried to, this time we've written a whole paper about it. So I don't think I can remember seeing any like specific complaints about the methodology this time.
Right, like substantive critiques.
Right. Or I think it was the critique that like we're not neutral.
Which you can do make those kind of ad hominem, like attacking the authors in almost all cases. I mean, authors will have opinions of things, but I don't. At least personally, as we've kind of talked about earlier, I'm not super concerned about that particular issue.
Yeah, I could imagine being concerned about it as a different person than me. Somebody
who had a very different point of view.
It seems quite hard to do anything about. So I feel like we've been pretty open about the entire process. So I'm more inclined to listen to object level criticisms about how we should do it differently. How the questions should be different.
Yeah, and that's the nature of science, right? We shouldn't get too caught up in, you're wrong just because you're you. It should be, no, you're wrong because here are some good scientific or evidence-based reasons why we should be concerned about this particular result or this particular method.
I would at least like for it to be more like that.
Reality might be a bit different.
I feel like if a thing is really complicated, it's and you can't tell all the details of how it's done, it's reasonable to be like, that person really wanted this outcome. What, maybe they caused it somehow. I guess happy for other people to try and run surveys about this topic who have opposite opinions. We don't actually try to get more people who are clearly neutral to send out the survey. But yeah, it didn't work out. I think a different kind of feedback we've gotten is just like AI researchers writing emails to me being mostly positive. This was a good survey.
Yeah, I'm sure there's been lots of positive engagement as well. That's great. Fantastic. Well, I have one last question for you, depending on, it may be a big one, I'm not sure. Is you know, Katja, we kind of started on this a little bit earlier, but I'd love to dig into it more. You've spent a lot of time over the years thinking about AI futures. What are some of your thoughts about the future? You know, how you think it will go? Let's just start there. Like, how do you think? Yeah, what are some of your present thoughts on like how the future with AI seems to be shaping up?
I admit that with even that much thinking, it feels extremely uncertain to me.
Right.
I think the way in which it seems like it will just affect, every aspect of life, makes it hard to like have a clear idea of what things will look like.
Right.
And I think aside from the potential for human extinction, which is my primary concern, I sort of worry that in the worlds where things go broadly well, it's still, much less well than it could be, partly just because we don't exercise very much steering in what happens. I think to the extent that things get shaped a lot by, I think a lot of things in the world get shaped by advertising. I think if the future gets substantially, if where we end up is substantially steered by what was helpful for advertising, I think that is a bad sign about where we end up. And I guess I just worry about a lot of things sort of happening at once, such that each particular thing gets very little of our attention. But I guess a way I think about AI is like it's kind of like at the moment, every human has a kind of allotment of cognitive labor that they get to do in their life. They sort of get it, with their head to start, and it's like hard to sell even half of it. It's labor or something, so it's like pretty well distributed, and there's a certain amount, and it's like hard to get more of it. And a way of thinking of AI is it's just like a huge new ocean of cognitive labor, and in ways that's scary because you don't really know what it's going to get used for. Or like who will have it. It could end up like a lot less equally distributed. It could be like, a small number of people who otherwise couldn't get, a billion people to do work for them do have that much, cognitive labor that they get to wield and do something bad with it. But also, I like prima facie, if there's just like a lot of extra cognitive labor around, if things are going broadly well, maybe we can point a lot of that cognitive labor at all of the particular problems arising as a result.
Right.
So I think there's like a good scenario where a lot
some of what you said really resonated with me. I mean, I think the point about the distribution is a really good one, and I've actually not heard it described the way you described it, which is today every person gets like a chunk of like cognitive labor that they get to sell. So we have like our time, and that's quite a valuable thing. If all of a sudden there is a huge amount of new cognitive labor, but that is now not attached per person, but it's actually like attached to GPUs or attached to other capital things you can buy with capital. And then, maybe the people who have lots of capital or have the GPUs suddenly have lots of ability to affect the world disproportionately. So I think that distribution question is a really good one, and one that we have to dig into. The other part I'm just trying to think carefully about, because it's interesting, because I think for the most part, or a large chunk of the world believes that, generally knowledge is good and research is good. Better understanding the world is a good thing. In fact, so much so that we have enshrined things like free speech and Enlightenment ideals and, these things. So we tend to think knowledge is good, learning is good, research is good. But I guess, were you touching on the point that maybe that might not be the case, or that kind of that significant acceleration of knowledge creation might not turn out to be a really good thing? Is that where you were kind of headed to there a little bit?
Yeah, interesting question. I think maybe the sort of general concern about AI causing bad things to happen is in some sense taking for granted that extra knowledge and information creation may be a bad thing. I think just then I was more saying, but maybe it'll be good, isn't a crazy thing to happen with additional like knowledge creation. But I guess I feel like we're like familiar with some cases where you don't want additional knowledge creation. Like in the Second World War, it was important to try and stop the Nazis from getting the information about various nuclear physics papers, for instance. Or like, I think in general, I guess like I think of, I was saying like things could be less equally distributed. I think of there as being two things going on. There's like this new ocean of cognitive labor, but there's also like potentially new agents who could have the cognitive labor that distributed to them instead of to the existing humans. Right. And I guess I think most of the concern comes from, well, who are those creatures and what would they do if they had a huge pile of cognitive labor in their laps? And if they're creatures that were, created incautiously or with, all kinds of goals that might be helpful if, at a smaller scale or without very much power, you could imagine that if they had a lot of cognitive labor and a lot of knowledge creation, for the purpose of whatever their goals are, that would be bad for humans or bad for the things that we currently value.
Yeah. And I mean, so to your point about the World War II piece, I think another example might be that like most people would agree with would be something like, I think if we all said all of the world's knowledge creation today went into weapons development, if all we did was make better and better offensive weapons, then I don't think most people would go, oh, knowledge creation is a good thing. They'd kind of say,
Yeah.
oh, it's probably not great. I mean, especially if it's just purely offensive and no defensive type work, then it's like, well, that just sounds like destructive. You know, we just like destroy each other. And so I think already could probably imagine scenarios where knowledge creation is bad. So maybe when people say knowledge creation is good, what they really mean today is the knowledge creation that happens today tends to be good, which is led by human values. You know, I kind of see a lot of this in things like cybersecurity, where you kind of default to more things being open and in the hands of everyone, because like things like cryptography, because you go, well, there's so many more people who want to just live their lives and do positive things. Like it's okay. You're giving a lot more people a good technology than a few bad people that same technology. I guess the difference with cryptography also is that the actual technology has a bit of a defensive bent to it potentially. But yeah, it's definitely not the case that all knowledge creation is good. And I think maybe that's where some of these challenges become a real thing that we're thinking about.
Yep. It seems right. I feel like you might wonder if it's mostly good now, why would it switch to being bad?
Yeah, it's a good question.
But yeah.
Yeah, it is a really good question. And I guess one argument there, and I'm not making strong arguments here, just like kind of trying to think about what they would be. One would be that some of the things we're creating have the offensive, like the asymmetry, you know. So for example, if somebody released an LLM that was very good at bioweapons, you know, and that's really hard to defend against. So there could be some of those things could be like symmetry, which is kind of what people talk about in the context of nuclear weapons and their invention being like a lot of people I think would undo that if they could. So that's an example of one thing. Another would be the lack of human values. So that could be the kind of more the misalignment problem of you have a really powerful AI agent that is producing knowledge, but not towards the ends that we as humans care about.
Yeah. I guess the first one could be more like, well, we see particular things particular knowledge that might be created and it just looks kind of more bad than usual. Or it could be, I feel like that there's a version that's sort of like, well, it's not that knowledge creation here is more likely to be bad. It's just that actually it's always being quite risky in that, like, this is the kind of fragile world hypothesis type thing. I don't know if you've heard of this, like Nick Bostrom's paper about this, where it's like, well, each new technology that you pull out of the ether has like some tiny chance of being really terrible and hard to defend against. So like on average, so far pulling them out has been good, but we're just always living in fear of the really bad one coming out of the hat. Is a different kind of story you could have there.
Yeah, definitely. I guess the good news is like after let's call it 200,000 years of human knowledge creation, the net effect. I mean, people will disagree. Obviously, some people wish we could go back in time, or some. And to be fair, like some specific peoples and cultures and things have not ended up in a good place with that. But I would say a lot of people, a large number of people would say, yes, we're in a better place than we were 200,000 years ago. So the average effect so far has been good. But I guess like the question is, does that continue to go on forever? Are there real points of real risk, or has this been an aberration?
I mean, like, it does push me toward thinking like there aren't, that many, like we shouldn't expect something terrible to come out of out of the hat any time at any particular, short period. Is you could argue, well, if we speed everything up, then we're just going to get a bajillion things in some very short period, and then I'm more worried. But I think overall, I'm more concerned, or like the story that the reason you would expect it to be bad now when it's been good in the past is because you're creating new agents who want things that you consider bad and are more able to control the cognitive labor than you.
That's the concern you have looking into the future, that's the thing. We might be creating the agents that want something else.
Yeah, I think I find that explanation for why you would expect things to be bad when they have been good. I think that's doing a lot of the work for me, rather than these other ones that are more.
I would agree with that. I think some of these like misuse or socioeconomic challenges with humans still firmly in control or firmly holding the power, they're still very valid. And one concern I do have is around maybe the speed, because I do think we have had more time in the past for institutions and laws and norms to catch up with some of the kind of the downside risks. So the speed aspect is somewhat concerning. And you could argue
agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, you could already look at some of the things like deterioration of mental health in the time that social media has come around, that we haven't been able to kind of adequately update etiquettes and laws to try and account for some of those like mental health impacts of something like social media potentially. But the thing that really keeps me up at night, or has in the past, let's say, has been this question of, are we creating agents that are fundamentally different to what's come before, in the sense that they are themselves, like AI agents are themselves knowledge creators, power-seeking, goal-seeking agents. And that's fundamentally different. That's more analogous to humans arriving on the scene than it is to humans creating any particular tool on the scene. And we know that Earth has looked dramatically different in the time that humanity has shown up, in how quickly we've reshaped the world around us. And so that's for me the biggest concern as well.
I do think there's an interesting analogy to like corporations, which, is unpopular. Lots of people think that's a bad analogy to make, apparently. But I think like, to the extent your argument that things might go badly is like, what if there were things that were smarter than humans and wanted things that were not perfectly aligned with human goals? I think it's worth at that point being like, all right, well, we do have corporations that are, somewhat coherent in what they do, and they are each of them smarter than a human, in that they at least involve a lot of somewhat coordinated humans, and they do have non-human goals, in that often they're seeking profits within the law, hopefully, but that's not actually the same as being generally in favor of things that humans care about. But I think you could go either way on like what you take away from this. Like, I think you could be like, well,
I was going to say,
or you could be like, well, things have gone badly and they're just going to go. It's going to go more badly, or like things have gone well in ways and badly in ways that are like less captured by your metrics or something. And the ways that things are going badly will, accelerate, or there'll be like more effort into exploiting whatever loopholes can be exploited. I'm not sure what to make of this analogy, but
if you do agree, I do think the analogy is actually apt. It's not perfect, but it's a useful analogy, placeholder for something more powerful than humans, like an agent that's more powerful than humans. But what your conclusions are from it are more complicated. And I think some of the conclusions, at least for me personally, thinking about my own values, is rules are important, downside protections are important, but but they can also be very powerful agents of progress and positive outcomes as well. Corporations like literally feed and clothe and cure us and develop vaccines. So there's good things that happen, but only within adequate controls, adequate constraints.
Yeah.
Well, Katja, that might be a good place to stop. That was a fun chat about the future, and I can tell that you're a naturally kind of very humble thinker. You definitely want to figure out. You want to be careful in the ways you're wrong, as you say the things that you do, and it's a really nice quality and not a common quality. So it's really great to be around that and learn from that epistemic humility, as you might call it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I hope I'm
absolutely.
wrong and that there's actually very little risk.
I do often say those words. I often say, here's what I think, but I really hope I'm wrong. And if I'm wrong, I really want people to find me and tell me I'm wrong, and here's how, and convince me otherwise.
Preferably ASAP, so I don't have to do anything else about it.
Yeah, and there are smart people, smart, thoughtful, well-meaning people who are out there thinking about how the future might be just totally fine or on a good track. One that's on my reading list, but I haven't yet gone through, so I don't have a strong opinion, is I know Nora Belrose and some of the people she was working with wrote about, I think the title is something like AI and optimism. So there are people who are thinking carefully about the future who do think it's going to go well, and I'm definitely not a hard pessimist either. I think there's a lot of ways the future could go well, especially if we keep doing the things we're doing and thinking about the things we're thinking about.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do think the future is likely to go well, like nice. Even more likely to go well than badly, probably. Yeah, hard to say. Yeah, I think probably. Yeah, and I do find it also encouraging to see how much lately a very wide variety of people who've become interested in this and are concerned, and I think acting reasonably.
Yeah, because the future is always kind of changing as we get new facts about what's happening today, right? The more people who work on safety, the more people who are actively working on stuff, potentially that's actively changing what the future holds or what we should think the future holds.
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Katja, did you have any kind of final comments, suggestions, or thoughts for our listeners before we wrapped up today?
I guess sometimes people want to know, like, what should they do as a result of this or something? Like, what should the takeaway be for people in general? I feel like the takeaways that I think people should have are like, this kind of thing. We didn't talk very much about all the predictions about like what narrow tasks will be feasible when. But I think it's worth keeping an eye on this kind of thing when you're just like deciding what to do with your life. Like if you're, investing in education and that sort of thing, like realize that lots of things could change pretty soon. So I think like selfishly in your own personal life, this is a good thing to just be aware of for large investments you might want to make. And then separately, I think it's just there will be a lot of policy things happening probably. It's a topic that it's really important to be right about, like to the extent that public opinion will affect what policy things happen. This is one where the stakes are very high, and so it would be good if people broadly tried to be really correct about it and didn't use it as a place for like signaling allegiance to different things. Like there are all kinds of other topics.
Right. Like get out of the traps that help that force that keep us from really coming up with the right policy solutions to hard problems.
Yeah. Like this could matter a lot.
Absolutely. On that first point about kind of future-proofing yourself to some of these changes around careers, I think, one thing to remember there for people is that, predictions can be wrong, especially on very specific predictions about what happens. That doesn't mean you shouldn't inform yourself, but I think one of the things that I keep in mind around this is just like being willing to adapt. We are living in a time where things change much faster than they did, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. So recognizing that careers and roles will change and like being flexible to that is already a big way to insulate yourself against all kinds of changes that may be coming in, and even embracing it, kind of seeing it as a source of growth and change and productivity as well can be a really nice thing too.
Yes, lots of new potential that you might not have anticipated, as well as new problems.
Absolutely. Well, Katja, we'll leave it there. I just want to say a huge thank you for walking us through all of that. I mean, for firstly doing this immense research, which I know would have been collectively probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of people hours, and sharing your results with us and continuing to help us better understand the future with AI. It's really fantastic to learn from all of your fantastic work.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.